So, J. Edgar, right? The question would be, would this be any different if it had a different director? You know, because I mean, this guy, he clearly has a one-track mind, it seems, right? Now, whether it's skating over propaganda, as usual with his, well, I mean, some of his movies do not just skate, but as a biography, obviously, I'm assuming, unless it's of course a biography where he, the propaganda is sort of historical, then I suspect that may be the case here, but we'll see. But like even in the first few seconds, it's very obvious who the director is. Is all I'm saying, you know. And the fact that they ended up with Judy Dench, being like that. I mean, it's just I don't know. It even if I didn't notice who the director was, I probably would have suspected who it was, possibly, because somehow. So it's the same thing. So let me give a few examples of where I think he is propagandizing here. Now, of course, propaganda is different from just plain out lying, fabricating stuff. So I'm assuming most things happen here. Since this is a biopic, I'd be astonished if he just invents things other than, casual speech or such. At one point, he says here that in Chicago, right, that's Illinois, um, so-called communist strikes happen, right? And specifically a coal strike. So, all right, I wasn't, I said, I admit I'm not exactly the most informed about this, but from brief search, I'm assuming this refers to, and see, this is where the propaganda comes in. So the date isn't specified here, but I'm assuming this is 1922, since before he talked about 19, I think. And this is the most foremost strike in Illinois at that point in Herrin, it seems. Although it's not exactly, it's not in Chicago, is it? Um, so I'm not really sure if it is indeed this, just because of this. This is the problem with this not being a documentary. I guess they can just say however much they want, where the propaganda is even stronger, but they cannot quite find anything else. Like literally, Chicago coal strike. This is the first result that comes up. Other than those, there were so-called Cold Wars in 1898, and that's much earlier than Edgar Hoover's time, or never mind that. So this is the point, though. He claims it's a strike, first of all, when it's clearly a massacre and communist labor. Well, I'm assuming that refers to the United Mine Workers of America. Yeah, I don't see anywhere where it's communist. So either Edgar Hoover was obsessed with labeling everyone a communist, which I wouldn't be surprised, But this is the problem with having directors who have a one-track sort of topic, really. I mean, the other movies is not exactly communism. He derides constantly, but um, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was indeed Edgar Hoover. But at this point, I wouldn't be surprised with either of those. This is the problem. Because by no means does it seem like United Mine Workers, which are still active, by the way. By no means does it seem to be communist, although of course I haven't actually read much about it, so I'm still open to uh, being convinced otherwise, of course. But yeah, I mean, 20 deaths. So that's the one thing that he hasn't mentioned. But of course, he did mention the killings in Washington. Well, what kind of imbalanced stuff is that? You know, if you're going to mention killings, this is where the propaganda lies. So he called it a strike. Now that might people might chalk it down to, well, there not being enough time to say exactly what happened. The fact that people died, just a small fact. Literally, this is labeled a massacre here. If it is indeed the one in Heron, but yeah, then somehow he labeled the one in Washington uh, a murder. Of course, multiple murders, presumably. So there's the thing, and even before, even before he specified that this is, I don't know if this is that might be possibly in hindsight. So the fact that, well, when Hoover was saying this, when he was supposed to be saying that he was supposed to be old. So I mean, in hindsight, in that point, I mean, but I don't know, just even before. Anyway, the point is, even before when he mentioned the 1919 bombings, yeah, he specified that it was by communists. When all I could find is that it was by anarchists, which is a slight difference. So yeah. And with regards to the United Mine Workers, doesn't seem like by all means they were communists at all. They yeah, like even Roosevelt was outraged um, when the biggest conflict happened, in fact. But yeah, regardless of director, this character Hoover, I've always kind of known what kind of character he was, but yeah, it's quite something. I mean, if indeed it's true, dismissing someone over facial hair is just so absurd. And he claims it's due to loyalty, though. So I guess facial hair is an excuse, or somehow he thinks the mustache goes against him. I don't know. It's one of those things. Hey, quite arrogant, huh? 7 years he was with him as long as he himself was. So clearly a just depended on chance, right? I mean, if the AG simply wanted to promote this mustached guy instead of him, then he could have, if he wanted, done the same to Edgar. So it's very just random nonsense, really. By the way, I liked how that one congressman asked him about whether he ever personally made arrests, and how comics must be fictional. To admit, I never heard that they made comic books. It was kind of funny, you know. That they were supposed to have made one of Edgar with a gun making in a mask, and he never made such a thing. And in fact, so far, never seemed to be in a position to fire any guns, which isn't very negative, but he obviously is pernicious in other ways when it comes to his blackmailing. For example, I thought blackmailing, of course, was also legal. I'm not sure if it was at that point, but yeah. But I mean, I knew he was somewhat of a weak personality, but it was this weak. The fact that he didn't want Pervy, was it, to no longer be an agent just because he appeared on a cereal box. Yeah, well, I mean, okay, at least on this front, it doesn't seem like it's all positive about this guy. I was afraid that such a director, this will happen. It happened in the past. That's the point. Other movies of this, but as far as this goes, at least so far, it's not totally happening. But hmm. Also, haven't verified this, but apparently, well, it's implied that, although it's not made obvious, that he lied when he accused Roosevelt's wife of having an affair. He laughed it off after, so his mother was particularly nasty, wasn't she? Also, at several points. Although she did seem to think that somehow, oh, it's a nation's collective guilt that individual crimes happen. I'm not entirely sure how that's possible, but yeah, I mean, so she is very clearly guilty in an individual sense, but she was suddenly strange. I guess one can see why Edgar ended up with that. By the way, I don't get why they said that JFK being shot wasn't known in the media. I thought it was a very public affair. By the way, with regards to the movie itself, with regards to the makeup, I think they overdid it in some cases. Not in all cases, though. Like with his personal secretary there, what did she call again? Um, yeah, Gandhi. I think she aged well there. Quite naturalistic, I think. It's quite something to transform Naomi Watts. But when it comes to DiCaprio himself, not as well. There are some things that seem off, although not everything. The worst, still, in my opinion, is what's it called? To Tomlin? Was it Tomlin? Um, yeah, that guy. He just too much, I thought they put too much powder, whatever they do. Tolson, yeah, way too much. When he aged specifically, I'm assuming he's the same actor. I mean, they do look quite different, especially Tolson, but that's the thing. It's over the top, I think. I'm assuming they want to emphasize the fact that he's older than Hoover, but they did overdo it. I mean, some people grow older, not necessarily have, necessarily look like that, so I'm not entirely sure why they went to the extent. Also, I think there is a bit of a problem when it comes to the middle parts. Like, you get the aged version, you get the earlier version. There's also obviously another actor playing the child version, but there's no middle version per se. Like, at least so far it seems like there isn't. True. But it's a bit jarring, to go from, you know, the guy who looks like, who was supposed to be in his 30s, but somehow, apparently 20 years passed, and he still looks the same. It's a bit bizarre, and then somehow we go from there to presumably 50 years later, so about maybe 30 years later, but I mean, usually, obviously, you don't just have such a skip in your life. There's obviously a gradual change. And yeah, by the way, he also thought that he could just bully a doctor out of his profession, like seriously, just because he gave him his medical opinion that he should cut work hours. That's unbelievable. How is that denigration? It's bizarre. Yeah. Also, it's quite funny how doctors back then apparently prescribed what is clearly amphetamines, I assume, which is a bit, congruent, I guess, with his nickname. Also, though, it's surely that it must have been dangerous, especially for older people, to be having them. I'm assuming for injuries for the heart and such. With regards to possible propaganda efforts, yeah. Of course, as usual, it's a bit difficult to distinguish between director and subject. This is the problem with directors that have already displayed efforts in the past, and then obviously choosing subjects that they themselves have also displayed such efforts in other directions, in other careers, really, specifically Hollywood, although clearly Hoover had an interest in Hollywood as well. But at the 1:53 minute mark, ending at nearly 55. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the point of that is. I'm not sure who is talking there exactly. Could be either. But the fact that they did have a single second of Martin Luther King in a coffin. Um, so yeah, is that all he could afford? This is what makes me wonder, really. I mean, this might not be as obvious propaganda as, say, Gran Torino, which he acted in, and I'm sure he wants to be the next Jesus in. But I mean, this is supposed to be a biopic, so not fictional nonsense like that. But of course, propaganda is also about where, I mean, that's the point of directors and editors and scriptwriters. They can choose what to include, right? And so institutionalize the bias essentially, which creates the propaganda. And so, what reason is there that there is only 1 second or so of MLK? Because of course he dedicated a lot more to combating him, and I'm sure Hoover himself did that. I'm not saying he didn't, but why then in this specific movie would you include only merely 1 second, right? Like one of these uh, just one picture from another, really. So if people blink, that's it. They likely not even see it. It's practically a presentation, like a PowerPoint presentation, for a movie. So this is what I'm saying, that this could easily be an effort towards that. Because he spent so much more. He spent like about 10, 20 minutes talking about how he's a threat. Oh, and then what? Then you just display a single image for 1, 2 seconds. Is that right? Of of how you know I mean, if this movie doesn't even mention that he was murdered, at this point we reach Nixon's presidency. So they just skipped it completely. And that's after he went on for ages about how he's the greatest threat. Now that is clearly an effort at propaganda, right? Whether or not, I mean, sure, Hoover really did target him, but after Hoover in the movie scene leaving the room after he didn't decline his Nobel Peace Prize, that's it. We don't see anything anymore until this singular image. And the words that were said on top of it were strange as well. They merely implied something, didn't quite explicitly outright say it. But why would you show a coffin with him in it and say that lawlessness comes out, enemies, etc. I mean, it doesn't make sense if you just show a coffin, right? So does that imply that he's simply saying he was our enemy and see where he ended up because of what he did? That seems like what he's implying. Now whether Hoover himself said that, really? Or of course the director or scriptwriter is saying it. It's a bit strange. This is why, yeah. Also, when he was crying there, that is very strange as well. Why he was crying. Um, yeah, because Nixon was going to target them. It's funny. It's funny in a way, isn't it? Because Nixon was very much a similar personality as well, very paranoid. So in a way, he met his match, didn't he? But what did he expect? Did he expect that he could just threaten all the other presidents before him, and then suddenly, or did he not have anything on Nixon by any chance? Wasn't that his modus operandi? To threaten presidents, it seems he threatened at least two in this 2 hour movie so far, at least. I don't know if I tried to threaten him in the last 15 minutes, but yeah, he was quite a personality. Now, whether or not he was as totally as depicted, I'm not sure. This is the problem, as I said, when we have people who clearly seem to have, at least in the past, displayed an agenda, and it's not totally, it's not as ridiculous as Gran Torino, as I said, but there is clearly still an effort, somewhat of an effort at least. Um, yeah, so however much is real about this, just need to research later. Also, by the way, now I've never heard of Helen Gandhi before now, before this movie. Uh, yeah, you know, he went on about communists for so long. I was almost half expecting him to just go on. Mahatma Gandhi, you communist! You know, that kind of thing. Apparently it's spelled differently, but obviously pronounced the same. I have never heard of such a name before. Uh, well, spelled exactly like that, at least. And yeah, it's very funny how at one point he goes on about how love transcends it all, transcends specifically uh, artificial divisions humans create. Oh, really? What, like the ones you did create? You know, greatest threat at all. Quite the illusion. Like, it's one thing to go against gangsters, but yeah, you know what I mean? Quite another to, um, blackmail people. Hmm. Uh,
And by the way, the actor that they hired to do Nixon, uh, he does sound like him, but doesn't quite look like him. It's a bit confusing. Yeah. Uh, so anyway, yeah. Um, it's um, it's a movie as it is. I mean, I think it reflects his life more than not. But um, you know, it is realistically done because DiCaprio has been acting for a long time now, so um, no one can quite accuse him of not being experienced. Unlike, of course, to reveal Hoover was when he first was appointed, and because he has quite a versatile acting roles as well. As in, here he plays the director of the FBI, and in the other movie, Scorsese's movie, he plays a financial criminal. Hmm. I think at one point he plays Howard Hughes as well, so quite versatile. That's besides the romantic roles he has, of course, primarily Titanic, I suppose, just. Now, with regards to, the differences between the people who made this movie, this is the problem, of course, and the problem with having, certain producers and such. I mean, one never knows if they truly have a a role at all in changing the actual content, no matter how small. Producers are supposed to what, like, finance the movie usually, not so much write it. So yeah, the scriptwriter here is supposed to be someone other than the director, someone that's done Lance Black apparently. Never seen him as a screenwriter before, but so one doesn't quite know if, but still, apparently Eastwood is both a director and a producer. Now, directors are supposed to, as I said, with producers, it's an unknown quantity essentially. And directors are supposed to just be about, where people should be and whatnot. But you know, such roles, I think, inevitably can lead to certain options being changed, I assume. And just because there's a script writer doesn't mean other people won't have a say, right? I mean, even little things, they don't need to be the whole movie. They don't need to change the whole movie. Just I don't know, but it's ever so slightly suspicious at the very least. Clint, Clint Eastwood somehow always chooses movies that have a certain style to them, with a certain beat beyond the westerns. He began there, but even there, I mean, there's a certain thing, but he went on to other things. But there's still a certain something to the movies he does.
So to illustrate the kind of omissions there were, I mean, yeah, I suppose, yeah, in a movie you cannot have absolutely everything, but it was a long movie already, so and it's not like there were there they were I mean substantial. I mean, could just certain parts, but yeah, yeah. So the thing is, right? Um, he apparently tried to persecute. This worked out really well. Yeah, a future Supreme Court justice, right? So it's quite something. But yeah, he tried to do that. I haven't read his story. I suppose it would be sort of interesting. So yeah, Felix Frankfurter, and apparently he considered him the most dangerous man in the U.S. That worked out well, didn't it? So I mean, as opposed to like with uh, Martin Luther King, that didn't end well. How did it? I mean, it's not like he was you know. I mean, there's no evidence that he was directly involved, as far as I know, in his murder. But obviously all the propaganda fueled it. This is a bit strange, isn't it? Um, so yeah, he really didn't end well at all for him. Somehow he still was let on to go and head the FBI. One of the most horrid things as well he did as soon as he that 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 as soon as he became head. At that point, it was still a Bureau of Investigation, and it was foreshadowed in apparently his school debates, which the newspaper apparently. I mean, this was before. This was around the time when suffrage became available. For you know. Um, so it's one of those things. It was a century ago, but he still he was in his post for 30 years or something. So at least he was pissed off, I suppose. Pissed off that women have the vote, because apparently he totally argued against that, and to further reinforce that in other ways, he didn't let them work at the Bureau of Investigation. Apparently fired all the ones that already did. So this guy was really, really a brute. And the thing though with the movie is that pretty sure it wasn't mentioned. It's a long movie. I don't think either of those were mentioned, which clearly shows. But of course, the thing that was mentioned is his diatribe on how his perceived enemies, etc. Just not the enemies that people would generally think would be. I mean, it's one thing to make enemies, I suppose, of like I don't know, 10% of the population. Quite another to, yeah, if that is a 50 or is it 51%? So yeah, that's the thing. But I do like how he completely failed with the jurist. Hmm. So apparently, what drew Jay to Felix, what drew his attention is when apparently he founded the ACLU, which I wasn't aware of. Felix, it is, But yeah, what drew his attention towards him is apparently the fact that he noted that the police committed entrapment, brutality, prolonged incommunicado detention, violations of due court and process. Yes, I guess good forbid that a future law enforcement official doesn't follow due process. No, we cannot follow the process, can we? We cannot possibly ever follow due process as well. No, no. And by the way, I'm just saying, but isn't it funny how the first Red Scare, I mean, well, the second is sort of the same in nature, really, but the first was specifically due to, the Bolshevik Revolution. So it's quite weird how events so far away. Well, I suppose from Alaska it isn't quite that far, but still it's still, I mean, quite far. Anyway, they're completely irrelevant to the situation. So unless the people trying, to scare others about the Bolsheviks actually warned the Tsar. I mean, they never explicitly say it, but that's the literal situation. That was the literal situation in Russia. I think it was called Russia before USSR, and then became Russia again. So yeah. So unless that's the funny thing. They always exclude. They're not exactly explicit. They're just if you fear even the very concept, then no, does that mean you want a Tsar? Of course, it's very funny that these days there are actually tsars, so they're more like the heads of department or something, so not quite the equivalent of an emperor, I suppose, or such, which historical tsar was really. So it's quite weird, and somehow this guy here, Frankfurter, supposed to be, apparently. Um, him writing a book isolated him from his Harvard colleagues. I mean, how is writing a book, just it's bizarre, and how is critiquing some prosecution case and judges. I mean, that's the point of. I mean, well, it's supposed to be the point, you argue in favor of or in opposition to, and you present arguments, and then you have a jury. Now, yeah, I mean, just I personally never thought judges would, if you have a corrupt judge and a corrupt judge you'll have, and in all likelihood, I mean, they could very likely corrupt a jury as well. Although I can see how a jury can serve as a safeguard, but it's only a few people, a few extra people. I mean, better than having a single person, but still. Anyway, the point is, I don't know. I really cannot see how this Frankfurter. I keep imagining a cat sausage because Felix, Felix the cat and Frankfurter. So anyway, so yeah, I mean, why couldn't he have written a book? A book, that's all. Yeah, quite something. And then he became an advisor to FDR. And FDR was elected 4 times, so it didn't go so well. The first Red Scare did it. The second one, McCarthy was booted out eventually, so it didn't work for him either personally. Although, of course, I mean, there was damage in the process. It's not like they ever recognized the damage. Because, of course, that's how, a legal system is supposed to work, right? There's no crimes before crimes are committed, right? It's supposed to be a given. But of course, a director of the FBI cannot have that, can they? Oh, no. But, I gotta say, as much as he seemed sensible at the beginning, yeah, this Frankfurter, when he became a justice, despite opposition due to nonsense, well, seemed to subscribe to that nonsense himself later on here. Um, in Minnesville School District versus Gavitis. Yeah, I don't know. Just some people really yeah, I just don't get it. Some people just lose their way, I guess, or maybe they try to prove like the opposite, just to prove their opponents. So they go even further than they are, you know. Um, I mean, J. Edgar still failed, in other words, to you know, many people seem, but I'm just saying that it's not like he seemed to be totally sensible here. Like, you know, he advocated for judicial restraint, but sometimes it can be idiotic because here this decision led to violent attacks on people. Now, no matter what, you know, judicial restraint is idiotic if it leads to attacks. You know, I mean, this is a Supreme Court decision that led to attacks, which I guess is sort of similar to, I believe it was a decision that sort of triggered the Civil War centuries prior. But yeah, sometimes law can really create conflict when you. Also, so much for Edgar's weird trifles, whatever you could call them. Um, well, I mean, yeah, seem to be sort of similar view. I don't know how you know. You say honestly, sometimes it seems to me like it's not like I I don't know much about constitutional law or anything, but somehow the same concept somehow applies to um, just I don't get it here. It's somehow these people can really try to argue it. First Amendment only applies to some people, but not others. Yes, that's quite a perverse view, isn't it? And so much for yeah, there's all these supposed worries. Yeah, he was on the side of Dennis versus US. Yeah, which somehow yeah, one of those things, isn't it? Just quite strange. Remarkably, he also turned down Ginsburg deal to about things, agenda. So yeah, he wasn't actually very different from J. Edgar after all. I have no idea why J. Edgar disliked him. So I suppose he thought he would, remain like he was before he became a Supreme Court justice. And of course, later on, Ginsburg took his own seat. So very ironic there. Yeah, pretty much the only interesting case here was involving the Board of Education. Other than that, not very much else. I mean, you could take judicial restraint so far. What is the point of even having Supreme Court if literally everything is hands off? May as well just refuse all cases. But anyway, with regards to that, back to the original subject. Yeah, so you know, I'm surprised that actually, since Edgar remained there for so long, that as shown in the movie, he liked gambling. So I'm surprised that because apparently he didn't care too much about prosecuting indeed gamblers at the time. Probably the only thing that was innocuous that he did, really. I mean, you know, unless of course, it led to something much worse. But you know, gambling by itself doesn't per se harm people. You know, as long as it doesn't follow to anything else. I mean, it's a transaction like any other transaction. So yeah. Anyway, I'm surprised that gambling today in the US is not quite as ignored. So yeah, I guess the influence didn't last very long. Also, I think another thing we didn't mention is that he wanted, this is much more nefarious, he wanted habeas corpus to be suspended and for 12,000 people to be detained. That's quite something, right? And so the only reason it didn't happen is because Truman didn't want it. I mean, this guy was something, right? He wanted 12,000 detained just because he personally suspected them of disloyalty. Isn't that brilliant? One person can suspect 12,000 of disloyalty. Isn't that funny? Considering he was like I mean, his disloyalty is such a frivolous concept anyway. But reading everything he did before now and after, I suppose. But anyone else even more into this than him might accuse him. So yeah, and this is quite something. Truman was the one who didn't act on it, because of course Truman was the one who somehow thought that dropping nukes and killing hundreds of thousands was a good idea, apparently. So it's one of those things, eh? I guess if there are people in the same country, some people think it's unacceptable, but of course not for, for the first director of the FBI, no, that is totally still acceptable, of course. Why wouldn't it be? No, I guess it's always been a bit strange, that is, with regards to current affairs, etc. But back then he thought Charlie Chaplin, right, was was somehow Charlie Chaplin did slapstick, and he thought somehow that he was serve as for. Slapstick is like the lowest form of comedy, apart from rom-coms. But anyway, so I'm just saying, right? Alright, the way Chaplin did slapstick was, yes, with an intended purpose, but he thought he was subversive for a few movies. This was when, of course, World War II was just starting, so he seriously thought that somehow, let's just say, if Edgar was in Germany at the time, I'm assuming he'd be delighted. No, I'm just saying, he disliked Chaplin back then, who merely did, mostly slapstick comedy. Like, yeah, he might have had a few prosaic messages, but mostly slapstick still. You cannot possibly accuse, pure slapstick of being propaganda. Now, can I? It's like, oh wow, what could possibly mean if you trip over someone? Oh, one of those things. These days, of course, they hate Big Bad. Yeah, that's quite something. These current affairs, it's unbelievable. But never mind. Chaplin. Yeah, Chaplin's daughter is still alive, isn't she? I've seen her in the movie, didn't I? I forgot which one though. Yeah, she's still she's very old now, but she's still alive.